Hi there, students. Out of the frying pan into the fire, particularly to jump out of the frying pan. This is to leave one difficult situation only to get yourself in an even worse situation. This is to make your situation worse. So he had a lot of problems with the bank, and they were a real thorn in his side. So he decided to change lenders, and he jumped out of the frying pan into the fire because his new lender was even more problematic, was even more difficult. The city's residents were really happy to get rid of the mayor because he was corrupt, but the new mayor turned out to be even more corrupt. This was a case of jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Okay, so I changed schools because my last school wasn't very good, but this school is even worse. It's a case of jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, where a situation goes from bad to worse, or where a bad situation becomes critical, moving from a very difficult position to one that's even more problematic. So yes, she wanted she wanted freedom. She wanted to gain her independence. So she got married at a very early age, and she didn't know that she was jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, because after her husband was even worse, and she had even less independence after she was married. So this is out of the frying pan into the fire, from one problem to another, from bad to worse, from one disaster to an even worse disaster. Out of the frying pan into the fire. It is going from one bad predicament immediately into something that's even worse. Let's see. What about the origin of this? This comes from a fable, a story that is attributed to Aesop. Now, there are hundreds of stories attributed to Aesop, and this one is really from the 15th century, something like that, where there are some fish that are thrown into a frying pan of boiling oil to be cooked, and the fish jump out of the frying pan and to save their lives, but by doing so they jump into the fire, and that's actually where it comes from. Although this is probably only part of Aesop's fables from the late 17th century, but all sorts of stories are attributed to Aesop. So to move from an already bad situation to a worse one, to end up in escape from a bad situation and end up in a worse one, to jump out of the frying pan, to move out of the frying pan, to go out of the frying pan, and you're just making your life even more problematic. The refugees escaped from the famine but ended up in a war zone. That's out of the frying pan into the fire. My old job was really stressful, but my new job is even more stressful. It's jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Okay, yes. So to go from out of the frying pan into the fire, I changed jobs, and my new job was even worse. It was from the frying pan into the fire. Okay, so yeah, or maybe you leave a bad relationship and you start a new one, and the new relationship is even worse than your last one. Um, she divorced her husband, who was a violent alcoholic, and then married another man with exactly the same problems. Yeah, out of the frying pan into the fire. Yeah, you move from one bad situation to something that's even worse, that's even more difficult. So, out of the frying pan into the fire. I think I'm going to give this 5 in formality. I think you could use it absolutely anywhere. So, to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. Bye for now.